Hello, good afternoon. Today for our lunchtime lecture, we have two guests. I'd like to introduce our first guest, Melissa Shin. She is a licensed architect in the states of California and Michigan, and the principal architect and co-founder of Shin. Shin is a female minority-owned architecture and design firm named Best New Firm in the West by the Architects newspaper in 2021. And has been featured in Dwell, the Los Angeles Times, and various other publications. Melissa has worked in the offices of Herzog de Meuron in Switzerland and New York, Greg Lynn Forum in Los Angeles, as well as Gary Partners in Los Angeles. Melissa holds a Master's of Architecture from Yale and a Bachelor of Science in Theoretical Mathematics from MIT, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Visual Arts from MIT. Please welcome our guest speaker today, Melissa Shin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. Oh, got it. So I can't see it here. I see it there. Okay. Yeah, just a little bit about me. Thank you so much for the introduction. Started my practice. Started my practice Shin in 2018 with my sister Amanda, who's a graduate of UCLA. She's actually since left the practice, but our team has grown to be 5 women across LA and the Bay Area. And today our projects has 12 today our office has 12 projects spread across the US from LA, San Francisco, and New York. However, today on this occasion, I've decided to show actually a little bit more of my old work and talk about how we got started and sort of some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. So this is a photo of me and my sister from, I guess I already dated myself, but it's from the 90s. And sort of kind of encapsulates our personalities. So I love that. You can see our styles haven't changed very much. I pretty much dress the same as I did then. A little bit about me. I'm a 3rd generation Korean American and Detroiter. So my grandparents came to the States in the early 1950s during the Korean War and eventually all settled in the greater Detroit area. And growing up in Detroit in the 80s and 90s, which kind of brings about a lot of the conversation that I think Kevin and I wanted to have today, is very much one of identity. Growing up in Detroit with American-born parents especially, I actually never learned how to speak Korean, didn't really eat Korean food, had a very kind of strange and distant relationship to a lot of my heritage. And it's sort of one that I have since re-examined and through practice, largely in my adulthood since moving to LA and kind of being more immersed in the AAPI community here. So starting an office in many ways, as I said, is a lot about identity. When you tell someone that you're an architect, and you guys will say this soon, everyone asks you what kind of architect you do. You're almost immediately asked to sort of define yourself in terms of your work. Usually they mean, do you do residential or commercial work? But in a lot of cases, when I started my practice with just me and my sister, I found that to be actually a much more personal question and sort of one that I've really kind of been trying to investigate over the past few years. And so when we first started practicing, we had actually never really worked together. We came from very different backgrounds, but we both, when we started our collaboration, we kind of turned to our hometown of Detroit and found common ground in our nostalgia for a lot of our childhood and that sort of thing. So some of our first projects were all sort of based in Detroit, and we used Detroit as kind of our muse in the beginning stages of the office. None of these were actually built, unfortunately, but we'll get to that. So this was a proposal to rehabilitate downtown Detroit storefronts. And for that, we turned to the architecture of local landmarks. During this time, while we were almost tourists in our own hometown, at the time, and perhaps still, the dominant image of Detroit is depicted through ruin porn, images of abandoned buildings that fetishize the city's decline. In opposition to that aesthetic, we began a research project that cataloged demolished buildings that had been demolished since our childhood, representing them instead as these sort of nostalgic animated fragments, kind of weaving in a lot of our own recollections of these monuments and kind of giving it, sort of starting to develop our own aesthetic in terms of graphics and representation, which you'll kind of see throughout the work. And this actually, started out as just a kind of personal project and then has now turned into an ongoing research project thanks to a USC sponsored research grant where we're mapping and tracking demolitions across the city, primarily through a federally funded program called the Detroit Demolition Program. So one more Detroit project. The line weights are not showing up well, but so still in Detroit, this was an ideas competition proposal where we rethought the typical home in the historic Virginia Park neighborhood. It was a previously prosperous residential area of Detroit that is largely abandoned. Though some of the abandoned homes have been recently rehabilitated, the restored mansions are no longer appropriate for the modest 21st century family due to their size and required upkeep. This project playfully transforms a house through a series of operations that repurpose the existing historic structure while also exploring alternative homeownership, passive income, and multi-use scenarios. On the 21st century needs as Detroit passes through a new era of revitalization and growth. Each home is modified with the sort of possibility of weaving kind of a mixed use small business opportunity into the ground floor of the existing home, while also provide the amenities which are also often lacking in these sort of Detroit neighborhoods. And in early 2020, we revisited this project in the form of an exhibition at Woodbury University. Through large-scale detail models and drawings, we synthesized methods of construction, tectonics, and materiality that gave a new depth to an otherwise purely fantastical project. Unconventional moments within each proposal are carefully studied through the typical scales of architectural detail. The layout of the gallery was designed as a single detail sheet, which you'll learn about in your constructions classes, projected onto the floor and walls, including graphic scales and annotation across all media and surfaces. The wooden podia are a reference to cribbing, which is a way of underpinning houses during construction, and was inspired by a historic home that we had under construction at the time. So in a funny way, even through this exhibition, we were already starting to kind of parallel the work that we were doing in real life in our practice as we're starting construction on our first series of built projects. So part of why I called this lecture Small Practice is because we really started small. And when I say small, I'm talking about ADUs. So our first series of built projects came in the form of the accessory dwelling unit, or ADU. Does anyone here know what an ADU is? Sort of. Well, an ADU, which a bulk of the research on ADUs was actually done here at UCLA under the leadership of Dana Cuff and City Lab. So you'll have so many opportunities to learn more about that this summer. But they're kind of colloquially referred to as granny flats or in-law suites, that sort of thing. And they're essentially additional living units that can be added onto most properties for either private use, extended family, multi-generational living, sort of rental units, kind of passive income strategies, that sort of thing. So the rising interest in ADUs for our clients was all due to this new legislation that happened between sort of 2017 to 2020, which is right around when we started practicing, that eased their restrictions, as I mentioned, thanks in a large part to the work of Dana Cuff and City Lab here. As a young office, we found that ADUs were great learning opportunities. So in spite of their small scale, ADUs still undergo a lot of the same permitting and construction process as larger, more complex residential projects, oftentimes even more complex. A lot of the challenges that come with ADUs involve often fitting living units into very compact plans, very strange site conditions, a lot of times working within existing extremely difficult site conditions. And so because of that, we started doing just a little bit of categorization of these ADUs in our office, which is that almost every ADU comes in like a different shape and size, which also kind of added to the sort of reps that we were getting in terms of construction at the time. So here are just a few of those ADUs that we are either in construction or finished. Again, each one kind of coming with its own series of hurdles and complexities. A lot of these ones here had various size restrictions. Some of them had illegal occupancy that needed to be addressed through a series of kind of mitigated code violations, et cetera, et cetera. Then, of course, on top of that, sort of navigating the permitting process in Los Angeles and also various jurisdictions. Some of these ADUs are in the Bay Area. Sort of all of these projects spread across California actually presented a lot of really kind of interesting challenges for our office as we were starting out. And, you know, we had both, Amanda and I had both worked quite a bit in architecture, but I would say we had very little experience with like a start to finish project through the end of construction, sort of seeing that entire process kind of unroll. So these were all these like great opportunities for that. And so these are 7 of the ADUs that we've completed since 2018. And again, some of them appear somewhat simple. Again, the ADU was sort of this chance for us to get our hands on kind of a series of built projects in a time when we didn't have that much experience as an office. It also allowed us to kind of assemble a team of consultants and contractors and builders and all that kind of stuff, which are really critical to the architectural process. So these next 2 projects were developed in conversation with each other sort of just after that time, around 2020 to 2021. And they're both kind of represent a synthesis of the knowledge and the lessons that we've learned up until that point. So the first is called 50/50, which is our entry into the low-rise LA housing competition, where we've received an honorable mention in the 4-plex category. The low-rise LA housing competition was launched by the city of LA to invite architects to innovate about housing, affordability, new paths to home ownership, and sustainable residential architecture, focusing on the very recent SB 9 bill that allows for the upzoning of single-family properties to become multifamily housing. The project explores the programmatic potential of unconditioned or semi-conditioned spaces, thinking about the space between space or the space that is often left over on the site at the end of a project. Conceptualized during the pandemic, we were thinking about what can be learned from the ways that families were converting unconditioned square footage like garages, storage sheds, et cetera, into makeshift offices, bedrooms, for work for home requirements or families that were quarantining together, which we had seen as a sort of glimpse into multi-generational living, which is very much what a lot of the ADU kind of incentives have focused on. So we started with this quick sketch that shows the sort of puzzle piece-like proposal. And then this diagram is showing how we're taking this sort of typical 1,000 square foot, 2-story conditioned footprint of the 4-plex plan and pulling it apart. So in doing so, we're able to nestle an additional 1,000 square feet of semi-enclosed ground floor and rooftop spaces, resulting in housing that is 50% conditioned and 50% unconditioned, hence 50/50. The 4th diagram shows how the bottom floor of each unit can be partially sectioned off for a junior ADU, which is another type of ADU. It's basically a smaller ADU that's contained within the footprint of the existing home. So we saw the opportunity here to expand what are typically considered leftover or unprogrammed spaces to create customized areas for residents without increasing the conditioned living footprint of the unit. The ground floor encourages resident interaction by housing shared amenities such as laundry, workspaces, recreational areas, bike vehicle parking, EV charging stations, etc., while the upper floor has more private, sort of safe spaces to eat, play, work, and relax. The residents also have the opportunity to tailor or enclose these in-between spaces to fit their present or future needs. And taking advantage of the favorable Los Angeles climate, This site plan is an eroded block that contains semi-conditioned spaces that can be occupied nearly year-round. So what you can see here is as the block becomes more eroded, it allows for certain opportunities for passive cooling, ventilation, solar shading, etc. And sort of these semi-conditioned spaces then become actually more occupiable and usable throughout the year. So in the floor plan, it looks a little bit crazy, but it's actually following a system of 4 units. So there are 2 of each type of 2 units, a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, and a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. The units weave and overlap each other on the 1st and 2nd floors and are negotiated by the exterior cutouts. This zoom-in plan shows that Unit A has a workstation set up on the covered patio, and Unit B has portioned off a space for a home office in the kitchen. Both 2nd floor kitchens open up onto an exterior space. And this plan shows some of the strategy that allows for each unit to divide off a section of the ground floor to provide additional affordable housing to the community and or passive income to the owners in the form of the junior ADU. And that's the pink line that you see that can divide up each floor of the space. The sections show the strategic placement of the unconditioned spaces, calibrated fenestration, and 50 to 100 square foot vertical openings that run through the entire height of the building. And lastly, 2 views. On the left, looking from the outside in, showing axial connections between the outdoor spaces and the flow into the interior. And on the right, looking inside out, a kitchen that extends onto a private dining patio. While this proposal has certain impracticalities through its complexity, our hope was that the provocation of creating alternative programming opportunities that reduce building and permitting costs and increase the usability of the full site could be applied to further projects. And so putting those ideas to the test, this project is a 1,400 square foot renovation and 800 square foot addition to a 1925 single family residence in Highland Park, which is in Northeast LA. The front portion of the house was converted into an attached ADU, and the 2nd story was added to the main unit. To effectively separate the houses and comply with the ADU size restrictions at the time of permitting, which, by the way, this has now changed, a series of niches were carved out of the monolithic massing to create entries, a large outdoor patio, and a sunroom and laundry area, effectively dividing the ADU from the main unit. The porosity of the massing gave it the affectionate name of Mouse House. Someone asked me before if we called it Mouse House because it's really small, so I just wanted to make that designation. So in the floor plans here, like in the 50-50 plan, the pink areas denote the semi-conditioned carved spaces. And you can see the first floor shows the ADU on the top left, and the main house is sort of the middle part. There's also a 2-car garage and 2 additional parking spots within the property gate. The project came with a ton of hurdles, and we were ready for the challenge at this point. So built in 1925, it had been illegally altered upon a change of ownership in 2014. The property fell under a specific plan, historic preservation zone, and was actively under code enforcement for illegal non-historic alterations, illegal structural, mechanical, electrical alterations, and the illegal occupancy of the garage, which had been turned into an unofficial living unit. As we peeled away these layers, the house continued to reveal increasing structural complications as well. As part of the renovation, we were required actually to revert the facade back to the pre-2014 facade, which was considered to be the historic style. After 2 months of going back and forth with the historic board, we were finally approved to move forward with the more rectilinear facade shown. And the small fillet or curve at the corner of the opening was our compromise to the original arched facade that was rejected. The fillet, which is a circle that's drafted in between 2 lines that are coming together at a perpendicular. That theme of the fillet is something that we use throughout the project. So here is, this is the finished ADU and front porch. And while the house is mostly white and rectilinear, The carved niches are all soft and coated with peach stucco and partial curves. This is the before of the kitchen and living area. And this is the after. On the interior, the living room, like 50/50, offers a view to the front cactus garden, and the kitchen flows onto an outdoor dining patio or sunroom. The sunroom extends from the kitchen and is covered by a polycarbonate roof. Millwork provides storage as well as a washer dryer. Because this project was permitted before the new 2020 bill, as I mentioned, we had to remove some space from the attached ADU. So even though the space was removed, it was really important to us to still turn this area into a usable part of the footprint. And this is sort of a behind the scenes of the construction of that house. Like I said, sort of some of the kind of lessons that we've learned in practice is that you really have these opportunities to kind of absorb all aspects of construction. And I think especially being a woman on a construction site too, and sort of finding your voice when it comes to construction and understanding sort of how things are built. We really saw this project as an opportunity to kind of get a little bit down and dirty with a lot of those details and the process. Again, sort of when we had started, it's almost like every single thing that comes up is a real kind of opportunity to learn and challenge yourself. And so we did, I mean, this is way kind of beyond the scope of what an architect normally does, but we were really like measuring off sort of some of the structural details and that sort of thing, because in many ways, until this point, you live in this sort of world of abstraction where you're sort of seeing these things on paper. And it was very important to us in this project to actually see that sort of translation into the built environment. Okay. And then, so moving to the main house, this is the biggest alteration, the addition of the second story. I'll kind of just flip through these sort of first, this is the second floor, which has a kitchen, dining, living room, powder room, and large patio. And again, the patio is seen as an extension of the conditioned living space. Just a few more photos. These are a few sort of press opportunities that we've had about the project. And this kind of sort of transitions into what Kevin will talk about, but a lot of these opportunities have been also opportunities to kind of represent ourselves and our voices, just like the community at large, both architecture and non-architecture. And so those have actually become like really productive conversations in the office about how we speak about the work and sort of what our voice is. And then in closing, I just wanted to share this kind of fun project because I think it represents sort of our future in the way that we engage and hope to engage with the community. And these are projects in New York, LA, and Detroit. It's a series of mobile libraries called Book Towers for an organization called Wide Rainbow, which is a nonprofit after-school arts program based in New York City. And we started this collaboration with Wide Rainbow and the Black Art Library during the pandemic, where we designed a series of 5 small mobile libraries that were all donated to various places around New York. They have these kind of arched windows and doors, and they're meant to be a play off of the organization's Rainbow Arch logo, but also serving as an idea of a home for books. So we also found like some sort of playful things like little faces and emojis that were kind of appearing in the design. Here are just a few shots of these. So, and then since the launch of the smaller libraries, we've actually gotten the opportunity through fundraising to do much larger expanded ones. And this coincidentally was in my hometown of Detroit. And then we recently just launched another one in Inglewood. And just one of my favorite aspects of the project is how each library is sort of sourced and fabricated locally. We have a local fabricator, we source the books through a local bookstore, and the sort of small nuances and differences in the fabrication across each unit are sort of some of the things that I enjoy seeing. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I think in closing, I just wanted to add sort of with that project that I think in many ways, and Kevin and I talked about this yesterday, but as architects and as academics, we feel a lot of pressure to do work that is considered sort of serious and meaningful and critical. But a lot of the sort of definitions of what that is is kind of ever evolving and especially changing in today's social and political climate. And that's really something on you to sort of discover what is meaningful to you. And so things like this project mean so much to us in the office, just because it sort of allowed us to kind of have fun and find sort of the importance through design and the impact that we can make, you know, in a way that's meaningful to us. So thank you.
Next, I would like to welcome our second guest speaker for today, Kevin Sherrod. Kevin is the practice area leader for arts and culture at Gensler and design faculty at USC. Kevin has worked on transformative projects, including Tides, Loads of Hope, a project to create the first permanent Loads of Hope laundry room for people experiencing homelessness, as well as the Compton student housing, one of the first solutions for campus housing at a community college in Southern California, and the award-winning Debbie Allen Dance Academy, to name a few. Sherrod also served as a core member of the research leadership team with the Now Institute and Morphosis, working directly under the guidance of Thom Mayne on the 100 Buildings book. Originally from Philadelphia, Kevin's design sensibility and teaching philosophy are rooted in his lived experiences growing up in an urban center and 20+ years of experience serving in grassroots organizations. These experiences drove Kevin's commitment to supporting the next generation of designers through mentorship and teaching. Kevin previously worked as an urban strategies lecturer for the UCLA M.Arch program. Kevin's award backgrounds include Best of Design Winner Unbuilt, residential category for his work with Skid Row Housing Ambrosia, Progressive Architecture Awards for his contributions on Urban Awnings, and an honor award for WestSide Urban Forum Design Awards for work on West Edge.
You know, it's really interesting, you know, to be here and have an opportunity to kind of address the young minds that exist in the space. And as such, I'd like to take an opportunity to kind of recognize Melissa and, you know, the kind of courageous way she kind of unpacked her journey. And I think so often we're really interested in how we can change the world without celebrating our peers, the people who do the work day in and day out, who face real struggles. There's no secret that architecture, you know, has a turbulent history, but I think if we want to do something to rectify the issues that exist in our profession, in this kind of space where creativity reigns supreme, we need to really appreciate each other and appreciate the hurdles in which we have to constantly deal with. And so, you know, I want to thank you for sharing, and I want to thank you for all the things that you have done and will do. And so with that, I'd like to blurt out a number, a nonsensical number to many, 763. And why would I start a lecture with a random, seemingly arbitrary number? And I'll tell you why. And this is it's a big why for me. I usually like to give a bluff. My father-in-law always says, start with your bluff. And your bluff is really just your bottom line up front. So I'll give you my bluff. I'll let you know what makes me tick, what makes me go before we get into it. 763 is the number of miles between Sandersville, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to be specific. It's the distance that my great-great-great-grandmother walked. I come from a line of individuals who believe that if you put one foot in front of the other, you will undoubtedly change the trajectory of your life, but not just your life, the lives that are in proximity, not the lives that are just in proximity through your daily walk, but the lives that exist after you. I am here because a courageous, uneducated woman decided to walk 763 miles. Think about that. We may not all walk 763 miles, but everything we do on a daily basis will affect someone. The things that I've done and things that I will do are really an observation to her sacrifice And every project that I'm going to show you today is an observation of her sacrifice and my parents' sacrifice and the generations of individuals who've sacrificed day in and day out to allow everyone in this room to have an opportunity to be present and to even hear this lecture. Make no mistake, it is an absolute gift to be able to do what we do, to use creative expression as a paintbrush. What we're doing is creating canvases for the world to paint. They may paint through dance, they may paint through office work, they may paint through actual painting, but make no mistake, we're creating canvases for people to express themselves. I'll start here on this roadmap. This roadmap talks about the social determinants of health. It is no secret that we have marginalized areas in our cities. In those cities, we use these social determinants of health, these 10 determinants, to identify the likelihood of success in life through social, physical, nutritional, and mental health and wellness. And I've kind of reduced them down to the 4. We also in architecture have a really difficult time creating more ways to collaborate and empower. We typically go for inform and consult. And so today, I want to talk about what it means to really engage in a larger idea about, and let me actually go back, to engaging the community in a really interesting way. And so these are kind of foundational notions about a co-creative model. And this co-creative model really starts to prioritize and elevate lived experience while also allowing the community to take real authorship and pride in the projects that exist in their proximity. I'll start with the Tide Loads of Hope project. And the only driving thought in this particular project is dignity. Tide Loads of Hope is a program started by Tide and Whirlpool and Procter & Gamble. And they're really kind of a disaster relief apparatus that comes in this particular instance, you can see Hurricane Katrina, which is the reason why it says Louisiana, to come in and provide laundering services. And what they were really interesting to me because it's the first moment where you start to see fundamental human dignities as fundamental on the path forward in terms of health and wellness in our communities. What does that mean for me? They wanted to put together the first implementation or the first embodiment of a physical space that started to recognize being homeless or being without place as a disaster. Think about that. We weren't codifying homelessness as a disaster. We're not codifying leaving our women and children, our elders and our family members homeless a disaster. I fundamentally disagree with that. I fundamentally disagree with the notion that people can be housed and we should be fine with it. Thus, we create an architecture, we create a space, and this is kind of the existing conditions that start to reinstitute dignity. At its core is about the American dream, or what we should be thinking the American dream is. Dignity, space to be seen, space to have some type of understanding that we're not alone. And this goes back to the larger idea of kind of mental health, right? Think about it. How many conversations are we having with people with unlaundered clothing or that are homeless? We're not having very many conversations. And so in some ways, the only way you can really communicate is by doing something that involves or even engages them. This particular project sought to do just that. This particular project was in the basement level of the Midnight Mission on Skid Row, and the entire 4 walls were all cinder block. And so it started to get me thinking, like, how do you really start to reimagine what a cinder block wall space looks like, right? Sure, sure. So Skid Row is actually one of the most impacted areas with homeless individuals, not just in the city of Los Angeles, the state of California. Moreover, it may hold, in terms of density, more than any other space in the continental US, in terms of how many people who are experiencing homelessness. And so this space seeks to allow showers, laundered services, and other vocational training apparatus that reinstitute dignity. We take for granted the ability to actually wash clothes. Do you know washing clothes is an actual skill, something that needs to be learned? Many of us have learned this at such a formidable age that it's synonymous with the zebra wears stripes. It's so commonplace. We all know zebra have stripes, right? But there are people who don't even have this basic, I'll call it a necessity. And so Skid Row offers showers. They offer towels. Where do you think they launder those towels? I'll tell you, in this room. Sometimes architecture creates a blank canvas, so the paintbrush that they are now using is a warm towel. Sure, I'm romanticizing it a bit, but we have to. We can no longer sit idly while things like this exist. We have to use space to create blank canvases for the individuals that need to paint, the opportunity to paint, and to liberate their imaginations. I'm actually going to swipe on this and see if the video plays actually. Okay, here we go. And so what you're looking at is architecture now becoming a character in a kind of larger messaging about life from Skid Row. This docu-series was created by Laura Han from Handmade Productions. And this is really kind of chronicling what it is, what life is on Skid Row. And I'm just going to show you a snippet of the space and as it's been changed out, but I really want everyone to, and it's on Amazon Prime. This is everywhere. You can go look. It's on the free version too. It's called the Tent Mender, and there's 3 episodes, and we're on the 3rd one. But I would encourage you to watch all 3 to kind of build a larger context. But just this quick video, really quick, just to kind of show you how architecture transcends a kind of finite space and can permeate a larger conversation through really kind of reshaping perception. And so what you've seen at the end was actual people who work at Skid Row, not work at Skid Row and go home, work and live. It's a vocational apparatus, right? And so what you start to see is when we start to think about architecture, it's not just creating space to sit. You're really helping people to reimagine who and what they can be. And there's a specific level of liberation that comes along with that, right? And so the next kind of larger topic I'm interested in is the idea of access. And I'll start with an art gallery. We recognize that artistic deserts exist, which is to say 1% of art in the entire country is Black art. Think about that. 1% of total art shown in this country is Black art. Think about that just for a second. And so this gallery is really about access. We know that the reason why the numbers are so dismal is because time and access outside of money are the top contributors to the lack of kind of artistic expression in the Black community. The reason why this project is so important, especially right now, is because there's sort of a renaissance that's kind of happening. And this larger renaissance is in response to the mistreatment of the Black and brown body over the past 3 years. And with the advent of COVID, there has been this yearning for expression. And we all know that art enables individuals to be able to deal with and process trauma. And it also has the ability to capture the zeitgeist in a way that words simply aren't qualified. And so this space, situated on an opportunity zone, is really about creating space that provides access, proximity, hope, but also starts to create an apparatus for thinking differently about how we create or how we design. This is actually the start or the foundations of the space. When we walked into it, you can kind of see, this is not exactly where we started. We've already at that point kind of sandblasted and started to clean up some of the things and remove the floor. But you can kind of see we were quite literally working with just the kind of bare essentials. And so to talk about this project, you really have to start to think about the larger issue or the larger problem is, how do you create an art gallery when three of the four sides are large windows, right? If you put a single wall on there, you don't have very much space to hang art, do you? And so the second thing is, because there was a vocational apparatus, again, I'm a huge proponent of vocational apparatus, especially around the built environment. And so because of the advent of COVID, there were a bunch of people who lost their jobs, but this vocational apparatus reached out and got 60 individuals to start to learn metalworking techniques as a method to really start to fortify and reimagine what it could be to be creative and have a kind of expression that would provide for their families. And so what you see here is that mechanism that we used to create all of the details in this space. And so what you see on the far right is the actual polycarbonate wall, which I'll get to in the next slide, just being created. And so you can see the slight imperfections, and they were, some of the teachers were like, oh, we can go back and fix it. But we were like, no, you will absolutely not fix it, because that is the essence of authorship. When that father, when that mother, when that person comes in and says, oh, I was learning to weld and I made this mistake, there's a bubble right here. That's a story, that's a shared experience that family now has. And it's a big part of the authorship, especially in this particular community. And so the space itself is really modest. But what we're really interested in is the idea of reverberating impact. And so you can see the large steel awning and the metal doors, all that created from the vocational training apparatus. This wasn't bought. None of this stuff you can buy at the store. This was all built on site by this training apparatus. And each one of these individuals are now certified with the state, and now they make double what their income was prior to working on this project. And so architecture can find unique ways to not only allow people to express themselves, but also gives a blank canvas. And you can see here, we've created a space that can be malleable in many different ways. The artist you see is a kind of mixed media artist, Gianni Lee, who's done everything from Levi's to work with Maserati to work with, he has his own kind of clothing brand. And so, you have this really kind of interesting way that we start to share stories. In the far back, you can actually see the art or the painting start to come off of the medium, right? And so it's starting to be on the walls. And so nothing in this space is precious. We really were interested in an architecture that got out of the way. And then again, you can see the kind of gypsum board, and it stops behind things like the kind of metal columns, and it stops short before the roof, and you can see the brick. And the larger sentiment around that is, this is an observation of the parents and the parents that came before. We're not interested in erasing the history. This boulevard, this entire boulevard, is an industrial boulevard that made textiles and such. Those textiles, much like the 763 number I started this conversation with, it's someone's parent doing what they had to do to give an opportunity to their family members. And so instead of erasing that, we wanted to be sure that a lot of the work that we're doing is standing on the shoulders of, because it's really important for us that we're not erasing anything, but we're just working in concert. And so you can see, again, the polycarbonate wall, and we kind of just talk about how the space can be dynamic. And the larger idea of the space is that it's, it has its mechanisms for storage that tells kind of larger stories. This is a podcasting space, and this has a podcast, a farmer's market, and a few other programmings that exist within this particular campus. But more than that, we were interested, and I kind of talked about parents and a parent's parents, but we're talking about intergenerational or chronology of intergeneration thought. And so because it's so small, we needed to find innovative ways to store or to organize storage for some of this larger pieces that would exist in the space. And so we created a wall with a cavity that has actual hanging space for art that exists. And you can see this wall is thicker in nature, but it also has cages that actually pull out of the wall, and art is stored in there. And it has 6 racks. So you can't actually see all 9, and actually 9. So there's 3 rows of 2. And so you'll be able to see them. Plus we have some other storage in the back that's just kind of miscellaneous space, is why I said 9. And you can kind of see the flexibility of the space, but now you can start to see people from all over the world. We had Grammy nominated artists, and we had kind of first time art show presenters in concert and collaboration. And I think what's really kind of amazing about this is that it's not about the people who've accomplished things already. It's about them being in proximity to people who are there for the first time. For instance, these youth. Many of these youth from Compton actually have never seen an art gallery, have never seen art. And so to be able to allow them to be in concert with people like the mayor, Grammy Award winning artists, and things like that, there's a shared experience. There's a different way of kind of creating a different way of networking. And so this is actually probably my favorite event, because it really starts to capture the sentiment of what we were after, which is to really start to change the trajectory of young lives and really start to change what it means to have upward economic mobility as it relates to architecture. And this is slightly on the nose, and we know that, but it's really about kind of, allowing people to kind of shoot for the stars and land on the moon. And sure, it's a little on the nose, but not interested if it's on the nose. It has to be, right? We have to be really intentional about what it is. And this is, again, about us seeing ourselves and about being able to process and deal with trauma as you kind of exist in these spaces. This is kind of a larger thing of what it exists in tonight. And I'll just kind of flip through this because it seems like I'm getting short on time, but hope and expression. And this is kind of the Debbie Allen Dance Academy, which is a result of kind of working through 3 different buildings, 3 existing warehouses. And the larger concept is you kind of gently place programming on top and to kind of reimagine what that can potentially be. I think there's a larger thread that exists, is a lot of times marginalized communities were always juxtaposed with the kind of mass exodus, if you will. And this is a larger conversation that needs to be had, probably not today or here, but it's really us taking over spaces that weren't naturally intended for us. And by us, I mean minorities. And so you've seen us take fantastic measures to really be in service of the kind of vibrance that we know we really are interested in. And so you see us do things like, in kind of churches, you'll see stained glass windows, and in kind of our rec centers, you'll see these kind of beautiful installations and other kind of monuments to really start to celebrate who and what we are. And so I'll just kind of give you a larger plan of what that is. And then this space itself is really about three modalities, which is kind of education, performance, and outreach. And so the space itself is a performing arts space, but in a large kind of conceptual manner, it's really just about the idea of kind of like a choreography of space and allowing a space to be different things based on the programming that exists that day. It's kind of a rendering of what the exterior is during the day, at night. And then again, just being really kind of didactic about the idea of creating this flexible space, creating space that both represents the community, but also can be really helpful in terms of exploring oneself and really standing the test of time. And so as we all like to see kind of, you know, the how it started versus the how it's going, this space is actually built and done. You can see where it started, where we ended. This is again how it started, how it ended. And this is one of my favorite pictures of all time. In the hat in the middle there is Debbie Allen. Many of you don't know, but Debbie Allen was known for Fame, which is a kind of legendary film in the dance space and the performance space that's really talking about what that life is. Why it's so fascinating to me is when I was young, I actually went to a performing arts space, and my entire life was wrapped around a space like this. And so if you pay attention, a lot of your journey will be cyclical. You'll have an opportunity to effectuate change in the same way someone has done for you. You really just have to be a steward and really understand the moment in which you exist and take every opportunity to be as helpful. At a fundamental level, I'm really just interested in making sure I leave the world slightly better than when I found it. And hopefully I'll inspire someone to do the same. She's actually teaching Fame to these youth. I don't know how important it is to really belabor that, but what I will say, one of the most important films of our time, my time, not our, my time, have come back around, and she's teaching that very same piece. That's what I got. Thank you.